Nobody saw this coming. Not even Rasheeda Frost herself. Because what just exploded behind the scenes has fans questioning everything they thought they knew about Kirk Frost and the bombshell. It didn't come from an outsider. It came straight from someone who's been watching quietly this whole time. Spice just pulled the curtain back. And what she allegedly revealed has sent shockwaves through the entire circle. We're talking late-night secrets, hidden connections, and a version of Kirk that Rasheeda was never supposed to see. Sources close to the situation claim the tension had been building for weeks, subtle glances, cryptic comments, and moments that didn't quite add up. But nobody expected Spice to be the one to light the match. And when she did, everything spiraled. She deserves to know the truth, Spice reportedly said, and that's when the room went silent. Because the truth she hinted at wasn't just messy. It was explosive. Rasheeda's reaction, completely blindsided. Witnesses say her expression shifted instantly from confusion to disbelief, to something much deeper. Something that suggested this wasn't just gossip. This was personal. Fans are shocked. Social media is in meltdown. And now everyone is asking the same question. What exactly has Kirk been hiding? Because if what Spice exposed is even half true, this isn't just drama, this could change everything. And trust. Once you hear what allegedly went down behind closed doors, you're going to see this entire situation very differently. The moment Spice dropped those words, the entire room shifted like the air itself got heavier. Nobody spoke at first because nobody knew how to respond to something that serious. Rasheeda just sat there, frozen eyes locked on Spice, like she was trying to figure out if this was some kind of sick joke or if this was really happening right in front of her. Kirk, on the other hand, his reaction was instant. And that's what made everything worse. What are you talking about, Spice? He snapped, his voice sharper than usual, a little too defensive, a little too quick, and that right there. That was the first red flag, because instead of confusion, instead of denial with calm energy, it came out aggressive. Like he was already on edge, like he knew exactly what she meant. Spice didn't flinch though, she leaned back slightly, arms crossed, her expression cold, almost disappointed. Don't do that, Kirk. Not today. Not in front of her. The emphasis on her made the entire situation even more intense. Rasheeda's chest rose as she took a slow breath, her voice shaky but controlled. Spice, what are you saying? Just say it clear. Fans would later say this was the exact moment everything changed, because Spice paused for just a second, like she was deciding how far she was willing to go, and when she finally spoke, it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was calm, and that made it hit even harder. He's not who you think he is, Rasheeda. And you know something hasn't been right. Silence again, but this time it was different. This time it wasn't confusion, it was realization slowly creeping in. Kirk let out a short laugh, but it sounded forced. Man, stop playing with me, Spice. You reaching now? But Spice shook her head slowly. No. What's crazy is how long you've been getting away with it. Rasheeda's eyes flickered between them, her heart clearly racing, because now this wasn't just words anymore, this felt like something deeper. Something that had been building. Getting away with WHAT? Rasheeda asked, her voice breaking just slightly, and Kirk stepped in immediately. Nothing. She ain't talking about nothing. This is messy. This is what y'all do. Y'all try to stir stuff up. But Spice cut him off. Then why you nervous? That question landed hard because Kirk didn't answer right away. He hesitated just for a second, but it was enough. Rasheeda noticed it. Everyone did. Kirk, Rasheeda said softly now, her tone completely different. No anger, just hurt starting to show. Just tell me. Is there something I don't know? Kirk ran a hand over his face, pacing slightly now. Man, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Y'all blowing this out of proportion. But Spice wasn't backing down. You think this is a game? This is her life. And then she dropped another line that sent chills through the room. You really think she don't deserve to know about the other side of you? Rasheeda's face fell completely. Other side, she repeated, almost whispering, and suddenly everything around her seemed to blur. Because now her mind was racing, connecting moments, connecting fights, connecting nights. Kirk came home late, or didn't come home at all. What other side, Spice? She asked again, louder this time. Kirk stepped closer to her. Baby, don't listen to this. This is nonsense. But Rasheeda pulled back slightly, and that small movement spoke volumes. Pause. For the first time she wasn't immediately siding with him, she was listening, and Kirk saw it. Nah, see, this is what she want to get in your head, Kirk said, pointing toward Spice, his frustration rising. But Spice leaned forward now, her voice firm. I don't have to get in her head, Kirk. Your actions been doing that. And just like that, Rasheeda's composure cracked. What actions? she snapped, standing up now, her voice louder, her emotions spilling out because I've been asking questions, and I keep getting the same answers, nothing, nothing, nothing. Her voice echoed slightly, and you could hear the pain in every word. Kirk looked at her, his expression shifting now from defensive to something more complicated, something almost like guilt. Rasheeda, come on. But she shook her head. No. No, don't do that, don't try to calm me down now. If there's something to say, then say. Spice watched quietly for a moment before finally speaking again. You remember that trip, he said, was business. Rasheeda froze. Yeah. She said slowly. What about it? Spice tilted her head slightly. Ask him who he was really with. The tension snapped instantly. Rasheeda turned to Kirk so fast it was almost like she had been waiting for that exact confirmation. Who were you with, Kirk? Kirk's jaw tightened. I told you. I was working with who. Rasheeda pushed, and there it was again, that pause. That hesitation, that silence, that said more than words ever could. Fans would later say this was the exact moment emotions ran high because Rasheeda's entire energy shifted from confusion to anger to something even deeper, betrayal. Why can't you just answer me? She demanded, her voice cracking now. Kirk exhaled heavily, clearly feeling the pressure building. Because this is stupid, man, this ain't even worth explaining. But Spice shook her head again, almost disappointed. See, that's the problem. You still think she don't deserve the truth? Rasheeda's eyes filled with tears now, but she refused to let them fall. What truth, Spice? And Spice looked directly at her, no hesitation this time, no holding back. He wasn't alone, and just like that, everything stopped. Rasheeda's breathing slowed, her body stiff as the weight of those words settled in. Not alone. She repeated quietly. Kirk stepped forward quickly now. Okay, hold on. Hold on. You making it sound worse than it is, but that only made it worse because now it wasn't denial anymore. It was damage control, and Rasheeda saw it clearly. So it's true, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kirk tried to speak, but nothing came out at first, and that silence, that one moment of silence, said everything. Kirk finally opened his mouth, but whatever he was about to say came out tangled, like even he didn't know how to clean it up anymore. It's not what you think, he muttered, and Rasheeda let out a bitter laugh that didn't even sound like her. That line right there. That same line. You always say that when something is what I think. Her voice sharper now, the hurt turning into anger. In real time, Spice didn't move, she just watched, because at this point, the truth wasn't something she needed to push anymore, it was unfolding on its own. So who was she? Rasheeda asked, suddenly cutting through everything. Kirk blinked. What? Don't play dumb, Kirk. Who was she? Her words hitting harder now, each one filled with years of built-up suspicion. Kirk shook his head, pacing again, running his hands through his hair like he was trying to buy himself time. You jumping to conclusions, he said, but his voice lacked confidence. In Rasheeda caught that immediately. I'm not jumping to anything. You just admitted you weren't alone, so I'll ask you again. Who was she? The room felt like it was closing in, the tension so thick nobody dared interrupt. Kirk stopped pacing, finally looking at her but not fully meeting her eyes, and that alone told Rasheeda more than enough. It wasn't like that, he said quietly, and Rasheeda stepped back like she had just been physically hit. Oh my God, she whispered, her hand covering her mouth as the realization started settling deeper. Fans would later say this was the exact moment everything shattered because denial was gone, excuses were crumbling, and what was left was truth, raw, uncomfortable truth. Spice finally spoke again, her tone softer now but still firm. I tried to stay out of it. I really did. But watching you sit there, trusting him like nothing was wrong, it didn't sit right with me. Rasheeda didn't respond at first, her eyes still locked on Kirk, like she was searching for something, anything that would make this make sense. How long? She asked suddenly, and Kirk looked confused. What? How long? She repeated louder, now her voice trembling with emotion. How long have you been lying to me like this? Kirk sighed heavily. It's not like it's been some long thing, he said, and that answer only made it worse. So there's more than one time? Rasheeda shot back instantly, and Kirk froze, realizing he had just said too much. Spice shook her head under her breath, almost like she had expected this exact unraveling. You see what I mean, she said quietly. Rasheeda tears finally started falling, but she didn't wipe them away this time. She let them fall because at this point, holding it together didn't matter anymore. I defended you, she said, looking at Kirk, her voice breaking in a way that made the entire room feel it. Do you understand that? I defended you when people said things, when things didn't look right, when my own instincts were telling me something was off. I stood by you. Kirk stepped closer again, desperation creeping in now, and I appreciate that. I do. But you making this bigger than it is, bigger than it is. Rasheeda snapped, pulling away from him again. You were with another woman, and you think I'm making it bigger than it is, her voice rising with every word. The Pain turning into something louder, something harder to contain. It didn't mean anything, Kirk said quickly, and that right there. That sentence hit harder than anything else because it wasn't denial, it was justification, and Rasheeda's entire expression changed. Didn't mean anything. She repeated, slowly shaking her head, you really think that makes it better? Spice crossed her arms again, stepping slightly forward. That's always the excuse, isn't it? It didn't mean anything, it just happened, it wasn't serious, her tone filled with frustration now. But it always means something when you the one getting hurt, Rasheeda nodded. Slightly, her breathing uneven as she tried to process everything all at once. Who is she, Kirk? She asked again, her voice quieter now but somehow even more intense. Kirk hesitated again, and this time that hesitation felt heavier, like whatever answer he was about to give was going to make things even worse. It's not someone you know, he said finally, and Rasheeda let out another hollow laugh. Of course it's not. She turned away for a moment, wiping her face, but the tears kept coming because that would be too easy, right? Too simple. No, you had to go out of your way to build a whole other situation. Kirk stepped forward again, reaching for her arm, but she pulled away instantly. Don't touch me, she said sharply, and the way her voice changed made it clear something had shifted permanently. Spice looked between them, her expression serious now. This is exactly why I said something, she added, because this right here, this wasn't going to stop on its own. Kirk turned toward her, frustration boiling over. Again, you should have minded your business, he snapped, and Spice didn't even flinch and let her keep getting played. Nah, I'm not built like that, she shot back immediately. If that makes me the bad guy, then so be it. Rasheeda looked at Spice, then back at Kirk, her mind clearly spinning, trying to catch up with everything. Was there anything else? She asked suddenly, and the question caught Kirk off guard. What do you mean? I mean, is this all, or is there more? Her eyes narrowing slightly, because at this point, I don't even know what to believe anymore. Kirk shook his head quickly. That's it. That's all it was, but the lack of conviction in his voice made it hard to trust. You hesitated. Again, Rasheeda pointed out immediately. Every time I ask you something you pause, like you trying to calculate the answer instead of just telling the truth. Kirk let out a frustrated sigh. Because you twisting everything I say, he replied. But Rasheeda wasn't backing down anymore. No, I'm reacting to what you're not saying, she corrected, and that silence returned again, heavier than before, because now the damage wasn't just about one moment, it was about everything, all the small cracks that had been ignored for so long finally breaking wide open. Spice stepped back, slightly giving them space, but her presence was still felt because she had started something that couldn't be undone. You stayed out all night that time, Rasheeda said suddenly, her voice quieter again but filled with meaning. You said your phone died. You said you couldn't get a charger. You said all these little things that didn't make sense, and I let it go. Kirk didn't respond, he just stood there listening. Was that her too? She asked, and Kirk looked away, and that was all the answer she needed. Rasheeda shook her head slowly, like she was finally accepting something she had been avoiding for a long time. Wow, she whispered. Wow. Fans watching this unfold would later say emotions ran high in a way that felt almost too real, because this wasn't just drama anymore, this was years of trust unraveling in real time. The family was left divided, opinions forming instantly, some blaming Kirk, others questioning why it took this long for everything to come out. But in that room, none of that mattered. What mattered was the look on Rasheeda's face, the realization, the heartbreak, the shift from love to something else, something colder, something distant. I don't even recognize you right now, she said, finally looking directly at Kirk again. Like, who have I been with all this time? Because clearly there's a version of you I never knew existed. Kirk tried to speak again, but the words just weren't landing anymore, because at this point nothing he said could undo what had already been revealed. Spice watched quietly, knowing this was bigger than anything she could add. Now the truth was out, and it was doing exactly what truth does, tearing everything open, leaving nothing hidden anymore. And as the silence stretched longer and longer, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't the end of the situation, this was just the beginning of something even messier, something that was about to pull in more people, more secrets, and more consequences than anyone in that room was ready for. And just when it felt like the room couldn't get any heavier, Rasheeda took a slow step back, her eyes still locked on Kirk, but now there was something different in them, something colder, something that made even Kirk pause mid-sentence, like he finally realized this wasn't something he could smooth over with words anymore. You know what hurts the most, she said quietly, her voice steady in a way that almost felt more dangerous than when she was yelling. It's not even just what you did. It's how easy it was for you to do it. Kirk shook his head immediately. Nah, don't say it like that, you making it seem like I just like you just. What? She cut him off sharply. Like you just slipped and fell into another woman's life more than once, the sarcasm dripping from her voice now, and Spice let out a quiet exhale because this was spiraling exactly the way she knew it would. Kirk tried. Again, stepping closer, lowering his tone, like he thought softness would fix this. Look. I messed up. All right, but it wasn't something serious. It didn't mean anything beyond the moment. Rasheeda stared at him for a second, then laughed again. But this time it was louder, almost disbelieving. You keep saying that like it's supposed to make me feel better, she said, shaking her head. You think temporary betrayal hurts less than planned betrayal? That question hung in the air unanswered because there was no good answer. Spice tilted her head slightly, watching Kirk closely because now his frustration was turning into something else, something closer to panic. You need to just tell her everything at this point, she said calmly but firmly, and Kirk shot her a look immediately. Everything been said? He replied too quickly, and that right there made Rasheeda's stomach drop again. No. No, 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 she said, slowly backing up another step. Don't tell me there's more. Kirk rubbed his face again, clearly overwhelmed. Now you blowing this up again, he muttered, but Rasheeda wasn't letting it go anymore. Not now, not after everything that had already come out. Kirk, if I find out anything else after today, anything, it's over, she said, her voice cutting through the room with finality. So I'm giving you one chance. Right now. Is there something else you haven't told me? The silence that followed was loud, almost unbearable, because Kirk didn't answer right away, and that hesitation, that same hesitation, kept repeating like a pattern he couldn't break. Spice closed her eyes briefly, like she already knew what was coming. This is exactly what I was talking about, she murmured under her breath, and Rasheeda noticed Spice. What do you know? She asked, quickly turning toward her, and Spice hesitated for the first time since all of this started, which said everything. Spice. Rasheeda pressed again, her voice rising slightly. If you started this, you need to finish it. Kirk stepped in immediately. Nah, she don't need to say nothing else, but that only confirmed it further. Rasheeda's expression hardened instantly. So there is more, she said, her tone dropping dangerously low. Kirk shook his head, but now it felt automatic, like he didn't even believe his own denial anymore. It's not like that, he repeated, but the words had lost all impact. Spice sighed deeply before finally speaking again. I didn't want to say this part because it's messy. Like really messy. Rasheeda's heart visibly dropped. Just say it, she whispered, and Spice looked directly at her, her expression serious, almost regretful. It wasn't just random. He's been seeing her more than you think. The words hit like a shockwave, Rasheeda's body stiffening completely as everything inside her seemed to stop for a second. More than I think, she repeated slowly, and Kirk immediately jumped in. That's not true, she exaggerating now. But Spice shook her head firmly. I wish I was, she replied, and the certainty in her voice made it impossible to ignore. Rasheeda took another step back, her hand gripping the edge of the table like she needed something to hold her up. How long? She asked again, but this time it sounded different, heavier, like she was bracing herself for something she already knew would hurt. Kirk didn't answer again, and that silence, that same silence, told her everything. Months, Spice said quietly, and Rasheeda's knees almost gave out. She caught herself just in time, but the damage was already done. Months, she repeated, her voice barely there now. And Kirk stepped forward quickly. It wasn't consistent like that. Don't say it like that. But Rasheeda looked up at him, her eyes filled with something deeper than tears. Now something closer to disbelief, mixed with anger. So correct. It then, she said. What is it, Kirk? Weeks? Days? How many times exactly did you choose someone else over me? Kirk opened his mouth, but nothing came out because there was no clean answer to that question. Spice watched the exchange, her expression tightening because even she hadn't expected it to unravel this far, this fast. You told her you loved her, didn't you? Rasheeda said suddenly, and the question hit harder than anything before because Kirk's reaction was immediate. He froze completely, and that was enough. Oh my God, Rasheeda whispered, her voice cracking all over again. You did. You actually did. Kirk shook his head quickly. It wasn't like that, I swear. It got complicated. But that only made it worse complicated. Rasheeda repeated, her tears falling faster now. You built a whole second situation and you calling it complicated? Spice looked away for a moment, shaking her head because this had gone from messy to devastating. This is what happens when things go unchecked for too long, she said quietly, almost to herself, but loud enough to be heard. Rasheeda wiped her face roughly now, her breathing uneven, as anger started to take over completely. Who is she, Kirk? She demanded again, and this time there was no softness left in her voice. None. Kirk hesitated again, but he knew there was no avoiding it now. Her name is Jasmine, he said finally, and the name alone seemed to echo through the room. Rasheeda stared at him like she didn't even recognize the person standing in front of her anymore. Jasmine, she repeated slowly, letting it sink in, and she knows about me, doesn't she? Kirk didn't answer, and that silence answered everything again. Of course she does, Rasheeda said bitterly, so I'm the only one in the dark. The only one looking stupid. Kirk stepped closer again, desperation clear now. You not stupid. Don't say that, but Rasheeda pulled away instantly. Don't tell me what I am right now, she snapped, because clearly you've been living like I don't exist anyway. Spice stepped in slightly, her voice calmer now, trying to steady the situation. Rasheeda, I know, this is a lot, but Rasheeda shook her head. No. What's a lot is finding out your entire relationship isn't what you thought it was in one conversation, she said, her voice trembling again but stronger this time, like something inside her had finally shifted fully. You embarrassed me, she added, looking at Kirk again, not just privately, publicly. Because everybody always knows before the person it actually affects. Kirk tried to respond, but she cut him off again. And don't even try to say nobody knew, because clearly Spice knew. She glanced at Spice briefly, not with anger but with a kind of painful acknowledgement, and if she knew others knew to, Spice didn't deny it, she just stayed quiet, which confirmed everything further. Wow. Rasheeda whispered again, shaking her head slowly. This is crazy. This is actually crazy. The room fell into another heavy silence, but this time it felt different, like the aftermath of something that couldn't be undone. Kirk stood there, visibly shaken now, like he was finally realizing the full weight of what had come out, but it was too late. The truth was already out in the open, and there was no putting it back. So what now? Spice asked quietly, breaking the silence, and Rasheeda looked at her, then back at Kirk, her expression unreadable for a moment before she finally spoke. Now, she said slowly, now, I decide what I'm willing to live with, and what I'm not. And the way she said it made it clear that whatever came next wasn't going to be easy for anyone involved, because this wasn't just about one secret anymore. This was about trust broken repeatedly, lies stacked on top of each other, and a reality that looked completely different from what it was just moments ago. And as Kirk stood there searching for something, anything, to say that could fix even a piece of this one thing became painfully obvious. This situation wasn't anywhere close to being over. In fact, it had just opened the door to even deeper consequences. Ones that were about to pull in more emotions, more reactions, and a fallout that nobody in that room was truly prepared to face. Kirk stood there like the ground had shifted under him, because the way Rasheeda said that it wasn't loud, it wasn't explosive, it was final. And that scared him more than anything that had happened so far. Rasheeda, come on, don't do this. Don't shut me out like that, he said, stepping closer, but she didn't move. She didn't even blink at first, she just stared at him like she was seeing him clearly for the first time, and that look alone made his chest tighten. Shut you out, she repeated slowly, her voice calm but sharp. You've been shutting me out, Kirk, every time you lied, every time you chose to be somewhere else, every time you built something with her instead of fixing what was already here. Spice watched quietly now, because this part wasn't about exposure anymore, it was about consequence, and Kirk could feel it slipping through his fingers. It wasn't like that, I swear I wasn't trying to replace anything, he said quickly, but Rasheeda shook her head. You don't have to try to replace something when your action's already doing it, she replied, and that line hit harder than anything before, because there was no arguing with it. Kirk ran his hands over his face again, pacing like he was trying to escape the moment, but there was nowhere to go. It just got out of control, he admitted finally, his voice lower now, almost defeated, and Rasheeda let out a slow breath. No. You got out of control, she corrected him immediately. Don't put this on the situation, like it just happened to you. You made choices. Repeated choices. Knowing exactly what you had at home. The weight of her words settled heavy, and even Spice looked at Kirk like she was waiting to see if he would finally take full accountability, but Kirk hesitated again, and that hesitation said everything. You still don't get it, do you? Rasheeda said, shaking her head slowly. You still trying to minimize it, like if you make it sound smaller, it won't hurt as much. Kirk looked at her, his voice cracking slightly now, because I don't want to lose you over this. And that sentence finally broke something in Rasheeda completely. She laughed again, but this time it turned into tears. Almost instantly. Over this, she said, her voice rising again. You mean over months of lies? Over another woman? Over building a whole second life behind my back? That this the room felt like it was closing in again. Because now everything was out, nothing hidden, nothing left unsaid. Spice crossed her arms tighter now, because even she could feel how heavy it had become. You should have thought about losing her before you started all this, she added quietly, and Kirk shot her a look but didn't respond, because deep down he knew she was right. Rasheeda wiped her face again, but this time her hands were steady, her breathing still uneven but controlled, like she was pulling herself together, piece by piece. Does she think she's part of your future? She asked. Suddenly, and Kirk froze again, the question catching him off guard. What answer, Rasheeda said firmly, because if you told her things, if you made her feel like she mattered, then this isn't just about cheating, this is about you creating something else entirely. Kirk looked down for a moment, and that was all the confirmation she needed. You did. She whispered, her voice breaking again, but softer now, more disappointed than anything you actually gave her. Space in your life. Kirk shook his head quickly. It wasn't like that long term, I swear. I wasn't planning anything serious, but Rasheeda stepped back again. Like she couldn't even stand near him anymore. You keep saying that like it erases what you did, she said, her tone sharper again. It doesn't matter what you planned, what matters is what you did. And what you allowed to happen. Spice nodded slightly because this was exactly the clarity that had been missing. Before intent doesn't cancel impact, she added under her breath, and Rasheeda glanced at her briefly. Like she appreciated that someone else understood the depth of it. Did she know about me the whole time? Rasheeda asked again, bringing it back to the one thing that kept echoing in her mind. Kirk hesitated once more, and that hesitation answered it again. Of course she did, Rasheeda said before he could even speak, because that's always how it goes. Everybody knows, except the person being betrayed. Kirk stepped forward again, desperation building stronger now. I told her it was complicated between us, he admitted, and Rasheeda's entire expression hardened instantly. Complicated, she repeated, her voice dropping low again. So that's what I am now. Complicated. Something you use as an excuse to justify stepping out. Kirk shook his head quickly. That's not what I meant, but Rasheeda cut him off again. No, that's exactly what you meant, because you needed a way to make what you were doing feel acceptable. The tension rose again, sharp and undeniable, because now this wasn't just about the act, it was about the narrative he created around it. Spice looked between them, her expression serious because she could see how deep this had cut. This is why honesty matters from the beginning, she said quietly, because once lies start stacking like this, there's no clean way out. Rasheeda nodded slightly, her eyes still on Kirk. You turned me into a storyline I didn't even know I was part of, she said softly, and that line hit differently, quieter but heavier. Kirk looked at her, like he wanted to say something, anything that could reach her, but nothing seemed enough anymore. I can fix this, he said finally, his voice almost pleading now, and Rasheeda shook her head slowly. You can't fix something you kept breaking over and over again, she replied. This isn't one mistake, this is a pattern, and that word pattern hung in the air because it shifted everything from a single incident to something deeper, something ongoing. Kirk's shoulders dropped slightly, because he could feel it now, the weight of losing control of the situation completely. So what you saying? He asked quietly, and Rasheeda took a deep breath, her chest rising slowly before she answered, I'm saying I need space, and those 3 words landed like a final blow because they weren't loud, they weren't dramatic, they were calm, and that made them real. Kirk's eyes widened slightly. Space for what, he asked, even though he already knew the answer. Rasheeda looked at him one last time, her expression steady but distant now. Space to figure out if there's anything left here worth saving, or if I've been holding on to something that hasn't been real for a long time. Spice looked away for a moment, giving them that space, because this was no longer about exposing anything, it was about what came after the truth. And Kirk stood there frozen, because for the first time, he couldn't argue, he couldn't deflect, he couldn't twist the situation into something smaller. All he could do was face it, and that was something he clearly wasn't ready for. Rasheeda grabbed her bag slowly, her movements deliberate, like she was making a decision with every second that passed, and as she turned toward the door, Kirk stepped forward instinctively. You just gonna walk out like this? He asked, his voice strained, and Rasheeda paused for a moment without turning back. You walked out on us a long time ago, Kirk. I'm just the one finally catching up to it, she said quietly, and that line cut deeper than anything else had, because it wasn't said in anger, it was said in truth, the kind of truth that doesn't need volume to hurt. And as she finally walked away, the silence that followed was heavy, final, and filled with a kind of tension that promised this wasn't over, not even close, because outside that room, there were more questions, more reactions, more fallout waiting to explode. Fans were already shocked, emotions were already running high, and the family was left divided. But inside that moment, inside that silence, one thing was certain, the version of their story that everyone thought they knew had completely fallen apart, and what came next was going to be even more unpredictable, even more emotional, and far more complicated than anything that had already been revealed. The door didn't slam, but the soft click echoed louder than anything that had been said inside that room, and Kirk just stood there staring at it, like if he waited long enough, she might walk back in and undo everything. But she didn't, and that silence that followed felt heavier than all the shouting. Combined Spice shifted slightly, finally breaking the stillness. You really let it get this far, she said, her voice low, not judgmental, just real, and Kirk exhaled slowly, running both hands over his face again. You ain't have to do all that. In front of her, he muttered, but even as he said it there was no real fight left in him. Spice raised an eyebrow. So you would have preferred she kept living a lie? She replied, and Kirk didn't answer because deep down he knew that wasn't something he could defend anymore. This wasn't supposed to come out like this, he added quietly almost to himself, and Spice let out a short breath. Things like this never come out clean, Kirk. They always blow up because they've been building. Kirk finally moved, pacing again but slower now, like the weight of everything was catching up with him. You don't understand, it wasn't just about cheating, it got complicated. He repeated, and Spice shook her head immediately. You keep saying that like it explains something, it doesn't. It just makes it worse, she said firmly. Kirk stopped pacing, looking at her now, frustration mixing with something closer to regret. I didn't plan for it to turn into all this, he said, and Spice crossed her arms. Nobody ever does. But that don't change the outcome. Outside that room everything was already starting to ripple because word travels fast, especially when something this explosive breaks. Fans were already shocked. Social media lighting up with reactions, people picking sides, questioning everything they thought they knew about Kirk and Rasheeda. Some defending her, others dragging him, and some even pointing at Spice, saying she went too far. But inside none of that noise mattered yet, because Kirk was still stuck in that moment, replaying everything over and over in his head. She really left, he said quietly, almost like he was just realizing it. Spice didn't respond right away. She just looked at him because there was nothing comforting to say, not after what had just happened. What did you expect? She asked finally, and Kirk didn't have an answer because the truth was he hadn't expected this exact outcome, not like this, not so final, not so clear, and that was the problem. He had been moving like he had more time, like things could stay hidden a little longer, like he could manage both sides without everything colliding, but now it had, and there was no controlling it anymore. Meanwhile, outside, Rasheeda stepped into the open air, like she had been holding her breath for hours. The world felt different. Louder, sharper, like everything around her had shifted slightly out of place. She paused for a moment, gripping her bag tighter, her mind racing through everything that had just been said, every word, every pause, every hesitation, playing back in painful detail. Months. She whispered to herself, shaking her head slowly like she still couldn't fully process it. Her phone buzzed, almost instantly, notifications, stacking up, messages, calls. People already hearing pieces of the situation and trying to get answers, but she ignored all of it because right now she didn't have answers herself. She barely had clarity, she just had feelings, raw, overwhelming feelings that refused to settle. How did I miss it? She said under her breath, and that question hit deeper than anything Kirk had said because it turned everything inward. Every memory, every moment, now under a different light, every late night, every excuse, every small inconsistency she had brushed aside, now screaming at her all at once. You didn't miss it. You trusted him, a voice said from behind, and Rasheeda turned, slightly surprised to see someone from their circle who had been nearby during the fallout, watching everything unfold quietly. Trust isn't blindness, it's belief, they added softly, and Rasheeda let out a small breath, nodding slightly because part of her knew that was true, but another part of her still felt like she should have seen it coming, like she should have protected herself better. Belief can make you ignore things though, she replied quietly, and the person nodded. Yeah. But that doesn't make it your fault. Rasheeda didn't respond, she just looked away. Because right now, assigning fault didn't change the reality she was in back inside. Kirk had sunk into a chair, finally, his energy drained completely. What am I supposed to do now? He asked, more to the room than to Spice, and Spice leaned against the wall, watching him carefully. You start by being honest, for real this time. Not just when you get caught, she said, and Kirk let out a frustrated sigh. I was gonna tell her, eventually, he muttered, and Spice shook her head again immediately. Eventually, don't mean anything when the truth only comes out under pressure. She replied, and that hit because it was true. Kirk knew it was true, but admitting it out loud felt like accepting something he wasn't ready to face yet. You think she's gone for good? He asked, after a moment, and Spice paused before answering because this wasn't something she could predict. I think she's hurt in a way that doesn't just fade overnight, she said carefully, and whether she comes back or not, that depends on what she decides she deserves. That word deserves lingered in the air because it shifted the focus completely. From him to her, from what he wanted to what she was willing to accept, and that was something Kirk had clearly not fully considered before. Meanwhile, Rasheeda had started walking slowly, not really heading anywhere specific, just moving because standing still felt too heavy. Every step felt like she was leaving something behind. Not just a place, but a version of her life she had believed in, and that realization hit harder with every second. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message that made her pause. She looked at the screen, her expression tightening slightly because it wasn't from Kirk. It was from an unknown number, and for a moment she considered ignoring it, but something told her not to. Her thumb hovered for a second before she opened it, and the message was short, but it hit like another wave crashing over everything that had already happened. I think you deserve to know everything. Not just what he admitted. Rasheeda's breath caught slightly, her heart starting to race again, because just when she thought the worst had already come out, something told her this wasn't over, not even close. She stared at the message, her mind spinning with questions. Who sent it? What else was there? How much more had been hidden from her, and why was it coming out now? She swallowed slowly, her fingers tightening around her phone, because whatever came next, she could feel it. Already it was going to be even bigger, even messier, and far more revealing than anything she had just walked away from. And back inside, that same tension lingered heavy and unresolved, because Kirk still had no idea that the fallout he thought had already peaked was actually just beginning. And as Spice watched him sitting there trying to process everything, one thought crossed her mind clearly: this situation wasn't done exposing itself, yet not even close. Rasheeda stared at that message like it was burning through her screen, her heart pounding louder with every second, because just when she thought she had reached the worst of it, something deeper was pulling her right back in. Not just what he admitted, she whispered under her breath, her mind racing again, connecting dots she didn't even know existed. Yet her fingers hovered over the phone before she finally typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came almost instantly, like they had been waiting. "Someone who knows the full story," and that word "full" made her stomach drop, because what she had just heard already felt like too much, but now it was clear there was more, a lot more. She took a slow breath, trying to steady herself, but nothing about this felt steady anymore. Everything felt like it was shifting under her feet. "Say it," she typed quickly, because at this point, dragging it out would only make it worse. There was a pause, this time longer than before, and for a moment she thought maybe whoever it was had backed out, but then another message came through, and this one hit harder than anything before. "He didn't just see her. He's been building something with her behind your back. Plans, conversations, things that go way beyond what he told you." Rasheeda vision blurred slightly as she read it again and again, trying to process it, because this wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was something structured, something intentional, something that had been growing while she was standing right there believing everything was fine. "Plans," she repeated quietly, her voice barely there, her chest tightening as the realization settled deeper and deeper. Her phone buzzed again. Another message: "You deserve to hear it all, not pieces, not edited truth. All of it." Rasheeda closed her eyes for a second, because the weight of that was almost unbearable, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore it. Not now, not when everything had already been cracked open. "Prove it," she typed back, her hands slightly shaking. "If you're going to say all this, then prove it." Another pause, and then three dots appeared, like whoever it was typing something long, something serious, and when the message finally came through, it wasn't just words. It was information, details that made her stomach twist even more. Dates, locations, things that lined up too perfectly with moments she remembered too clearly. That night he said he had a late meeting. He was with her, the message read, and Rasheeda's breath caught instantly, because she remembered that night vividly. She remembered waiting. She remembered calling, she remembered convincing herself not to overthink, and the weekend he said he needed space to clear his head. He didn't go alone. Another line, and it felt like everything was collapsing inward, piece by piece. Every excuse, every absence now turning into something else, something real, something undeniable. "Who are you?" she typed again, but this time, there was more urgency, more emotion behind it, and the reply came slower this time, like whoever it was choosing their words carefully. "Someone who got tired of watching you be lied to." Rasheeda's grip on her phone tightened, because that answer didn't bring clarity, it brought more questions. More tension, more uncertainty, but one thing was clear: this person knew too much for it to be random. Meanwhile, back inside, Kirk was still sitting there, trying to piece together what had just happened, but his mind hadn't even caught up to the reality that things were about to get worse, much worse. Spice watched him carefully, her expression serious, because even she could feel that the situation hadn't fully revealed itself yet. "You need to be real with yourself right now," she said, finally breaking the silence again, and Kirk looked up at her slowly. "I know I messed up," he replied, but his tone still carried that same minimizing edge, like he was trying to keep it contained. Like if he didn't say it out loud, it wouldn't be as big as it actually was. Spice shook her head immediately. "No. You still don't get it." You think this is just about getting caught with another woman, but it's bigger than that, and you know it." Kirk frowned slightly. "What you mean bigger?" he asked, and Spice hesitated for a second before answering. Because she wasn't sure how much she should say, but then she exhaled slowly. "I mean, you didn't just step out, Kirk. You built something else, and that always comes with consequences. You can't control." Kirk looked at her, confused frustration creeping back in. "What else do you think there is?" he asked, and Spice held his gaze for a moment before speaking. "Again, I think there's more than what you admitted. And I think you know exactly what I'm talking about." That tension snapped back instantly because Kirk's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing slightly like he was trying to read how much she actually knew. "You, reaching again," he said, but this time his voice wasn't as confident, and Spice noticed it immediately. "Am I?" she replied quietly, and that silence that followed said everything because once again Kirk didn't answer right away, and outside Rasheeda was still standing there, staring at her phone like it held answers she wasn't ready to face yet. "But she knew she had to tell me everything," she typed finally, because at this point there was no going back, no protecting anything, no holding on to illusions. The reply came slower this time, like whoever it was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "He talked about leaving." The message read, and Rasheeda's entire body went still, her breath catching sharply as those words hit deeper than anything else so far. "Leaving?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper, because that wasn't just betrayal, that was intention, that was planning, that was something completely different. Her phone buzzed again before she could even react, not officially, but enough to make it real, enough to make her believe it could happen. Rasheeda's eyes filled again, but this time it wasn't just hurt, it was something heavier, something closer to disbelief mixed with anger. "He told her that." She typed quickly, needing confirmation, needing to see it spelled out clearly, and the response came without hesitation. "Yes." And more than once. That was it. That was the moment everything inside her shifted completely, because now it wasn't just about what he did, it was about what he said, what he promised, what he allowed someone else to believe while still standing beside her, acting like nothing had changed. "Wow," she whispered again, but this time it sounded empty, like something inside her had finally gone quiet. Meanwhile, inside, Spice watched Kirk closely because she could see it, the way he was avoiding eye contact, the way his body language had shifted again. "There's something else you're not saying," she said firmly, and Kirk shook his head again, but it felt automatic now, like a reflex he couldn't control. "I told you everything," he insisted, but Spice stepped forward slightly, her voice sharper now. "No, you told just enough to manage the situation, not enough to be fully honest." Kirk stood up again, now the tension rising back up. "Why you keep pushing like that?" he snapped, but Spice didn't back down. "Because I've seen this before. And it always comes out eventually, so you can either say it now or let it explode later." Kirk clenched his jaw, his mind clearly racing, because he knew exactly what she was hinting at, and that was the problem. He thought he could control how this came out, he thought he could reveal pieces and keep the rest buried, but now that control was slipping fast and outside. Rasheeda looked at her phone one more time, her chest rising slowly as she typed her next message. "Does she think he's leaving me for her?" And this time the pause was longer, heavier, like the answer itself carried weight. And when it finally came through, it confirmed everything she feared. She doesn't just think it. She's been waiting for it. Rasheeda closed her eyes as a tear slipped down her cheek, because at that moment everything became painfully clear. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just a secret, this was a whole other reality that had been running parallel to her life without her even knowing, and as she stood there processing it, one thought settled in stronger than anything else. This situation wasn't just broken, it had been broken for a long time, and now all the pieces were finally falling apart at once, and there was no way to put them back together the same way again. Rasheeda stood there completely still, like everything inside her had gone quiet all at once, because at this point there was nothing left to guess, nothing left to question. The truth wasn't unfolding anymore, it had already landed, and it was heavier than anything she had prepared herself for. "She's been waiting," she whispered again, her voice hollow as the meaning settled deeper. This wasn't just betrayal, this was replacement, this was someone else standing on the sidelines believing they had a place in a future that was supposed to be hers. Her grip on the phone tightened as another message came through. "There's something else you should see," and before she could even respond, an image followed, not loud, not dramatic, just enough to confirm everything. Conversations, screenshots, words from Kirk that didn't match anything he had said earlier, words that painted a completely different version of him, one that was patient, invested, even reassuring to someone else in ways he hadn't been with her in a long time. Rasheeda's breath caught as she scrolled slowly, her heart pounding harder with every line, because it wasn't just what he did, it was how he spoke, how he showed up, how he made space for someone else. while she had been standing right there, asking for the same energy, and getting excuses instead. This is real, she said to herself quietly, like saying it out loud would help her accept it, but it didn't, it just made it heavier. Her phone buzzed again. I'm sorry you had to find out like this, the message read, and for a moment Rasheeda didn't respond. Because sorry didn't change anything, sorry didn't undo months of lies, sorry didn't erase the reality. She was now standing and she took a slow breath, wiping her face, but the tears kept coming, not uncontrollably, not dramatically, just steady. Like something inside her was finally letting go of everything it had been holding. Meanwhile inside, Kirk was still trying to hold on to control that was no longer his to keep. You making it seem worse than it is, he said again, his voice strained. But Spice shook her head immediately. No Kirk, you made it worse than it is, I'm just saying it out loud, she replied firmly, and Kirk looked away for a moment because even he could feel it now, the truth was bigger than anything he could minimize. I didn't think it would get to this point, he admitted quietly, and Spice let out a short breath. That's because you were thinking short term. You were thinking about moments, not consequences, she said, and Kirk ran his hands through his hair again, frustration mixing with regret. So what now? Everything just done? He asked, and Spice paused for a second before answering, because this wasn't something with a simple answer that depends on her. Not you, she said. And that hit harder than anything because it shifted everything completely. Kirk had been moving like he had control, like he could manage outcomes. But now it was clear the decision wasn't his anymore. Outside, Rasheeda finally typed back, "Why are you telling me all this?" Because that question had been sitting in the back of her mind this whole time, and the reply came slower this time. Almost hesitant, because I was part of it in a way. Not directly, but I knew things I shouldn't have stayed quiet about. Rasheeda's expression tightened slightly, reading that because it meant this wasn't just one person knowing, this was something that had layers. People aware, people choosing silence until now. So you watched it happen, she typed back, and the response came quickly. I regret that. That's why I'm telling you everything now. Rasheeda exhaled slowly, because while that might explain it, it didn't make it easier to accept. Is there anything else, she asked, and this time the pause was long enough to feel intentional, like the answer mattered, and when it came it was simple but heavy. No. That's everything. Rasheeda stared at the screen for a moment longer, letting it all settle, because now there were no more surprises, no more hidden pieces, just the full picture laid out in front of her, and it looked nothing like what she thought her life was just hours ago. Back inside, Kirk sat down again, his energy drained completely. She's not coming back tonight, is she? He said quietly, more to himself than to Spice, and Spice didn't sugarcoat it. I wouldn't if I was her, she replied, and Kirk closed his eyes briefly because hearing it out loud made it real in a way he couldn't ignore anymore. I didn't think I would lose everything like this, he said, and Spice looked at him carefully before responding. You didn't lose it like this. You lost it over time. This is just when it became visible. And that line settled heavy because it reframed everything. This wasn't sudden, this wasn't one moment. This was a build-up, a pattern, a series of choices that finally reached a breaking point. Meanwhile, Rasheeda slipped her phone into her bag. Slowly, her movements calm now, almost too calm, like the storm inside. Her head shifted into something quieter but more final. She looked around for a moment, taking in everything. Like she was seeing it differently now, every place, every memory attached to a version of reality that no longer felt true. You okay? The same voice from earlier asked gently, and Rasheeda nodded slightly, though her expression said otherwise. I will be, she replied, and that answer wasn't immediate confidence. It was determination, something steady forming underneath all the hurt. What are you going to do? They asked, and Rasheeda paused for a moment before answering. Because now that question mattered more than anything. I'm going to stop ignoring what I've been feeling for a long time, she said quietly, and that sentence carried weight. Because it wasn't just about this moment. It was about everything that led up to it, all the signs, all the doubts, all the instincts she had pushed aside, choosing trust over truth until truth forced its way in any way back inside. Spice watched Kirk, still sitting there trying to process something he could no longer change. You need to understand something, she said finally, and Kirk looked up at her slowly. This isn't just about you getting caught. This is about you breaking something that was built over years, and that doesn't just reset because you're ready to fix it now. Kirk nodded slightly, though it was clear he hadn't fully accepted it yet. I hear you, he said, but Spice could tell he didn't feel it yet. Not fully hearing it and understanding it are two different things, she replied, and Kirk looked down again because deep down he knew she was right. Outside, Rasheeda took one last breath before starting to walk again. This time with more direction, more purpose, because while everything behind her felt uncertain, everything ahead of her felt like a choice, one she finally had control over. And as she moved forward, one thought stayed clear in her mind: this wasn't just the end of something, this was the beginning of figuring out what she was no longer willing to accept, and that realization, more than anything else, was what made her steps feel steady even in the middle of everything that had just fallen apart. The night stretched on, but nothing about it felt normal anymore. Everything felt sharper, heavier, like every second carried the weight of what had just been uncovered, and Rasheeda kept walking, not fast, not slow, just steady, like she was trying to keep her thoughts from spiraling too far ahead of her, because every time she let her mind wander, it pulled her right back into those messages, those words, those confirmations that had changed everything. He talked about leaving. That line echoed again and again in her head, and it hit differently now, not like a shock, but like something settling into place, something final, something that couldn't be undone. She stopped for a moment, looking out into the distance, her chest rising slowly as she tried to ground herself. Because right now she had two choices: fall apart completely, or hold herself together long enough to figure out what came next. And for the first time that night she chose the second option. She straightened slightly, wiping her face again, not to hide the tears but to clear her vision, because she needed to see clearly now, more than ever. Meanwhile, back inside, Kirk hadn't moved much. He was still sitting there, staring at nothing in particular, like he was trying to replay everything and find a version of it that ended differently, but there wasn't one. Every path led right back to the same moment, the same silence, the same door closing. And Spice watched him for a while before finally speaking again. "You still thinking there's a way to spin this?" she said, and Kirk shook his head slowly. "Nah, not spin it. Just fix it somehow," he replied, but even as he said it, the uncertainty in his voice made it clear he didn't know what fixing it even looked like anymore. Spice sighed softly. "Fixing something means you understand how it broke, and right now, you still stuck on what you lost, not what you did," she said, and that line landed because it forced Kirk to look at it differently, not from his perspective but from hers. From the one who had to carry all of it. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said again, almost like he was trying to convince himself more than her, and Spice shook her head. "Intent doesn't change outcome, Kirk. You keep circling back to that like it matters more than what actually happened," she replied, and Kirk leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together like he was trying to hold himself in place. "So what? I just sit here and wait for her to decide everything?" he asked, and Spice nodded slightly. "Yeah. Because that's what happens when you take away someone's ability to trust you. The control shifts whether you like it or not." Kirk exhaled slowly, because hearing it like that made it real in a way he couldn't ignore anymore. Outside, Rasheeda's phone buzzed again, but this time she didn't rush to check it. She let it sit for a moment because she needed space from everything, from the noise, from the revelations, from the constant flood of information that kept hitting her all at once. When she finally looked, it wasn't the unknown number. This time it was Kirk, and just seeing his name on the screen made something in her chest tighten, not with longing, not with comfort, but with conflict. She stared at it for a few seconds before opening the message. "Can we talk simple, direct?" Like nothing had just exploded around them, and that alone made her shake her head slightly, because it showed how different their realities still were. He was looking for a conversation. She was still processing a collapse. She didn't respond right away. She just looked at the words, letting them sit, because answering too quickly felt like slipping back into something she wasn't ready to return to. Another message came through almost immediately: "Please," and that word carried a different weight, not authority, not assumption, just request. But even that didn't change what had already happened. Rasheeda took a slow breath before finally typing back, "Not right now," and that was all she said. No explanation, no emotion, just a boundary. Something clear, something she hadn't fully allowed herself to set before she sent it, and watched as the message delivered, and for the first time that night she felt a small shift. Not relief, not peace, but control, something steady forming underneath everything else. Back inside, Kirk's phone lit up, and he grabbed it quickly like he had been waiting for it, his eyes scanning the message, and his expression fell slightly when he read it. "Not right now," he repeated quietly, and Spice watched him closely. "That's probably the most honest response you gonna get tonight," she said, and Kirk nodded slowly, because he knew she was right. Pushing now would only make things worse. "I just need her to hear me out," he said, and Spice tilted her head slightly. "You've been talking this whole time, Kirk. Maybe it's time you actually listen." And that line hit harder than anything else, because it flipped the entire situation from what he wanted to what she needed. Kirk leaned back, slightly staring at the ceiling for a moment, because for the first time, He was being forced to sit with it without distraction, without excuses, without the ability to redirect. It was just him and the reality of what he had done outside. Rasheeda started walking again, this time with more purpose, her steps more grounded because even though everything felt broken, she wasn't as lost as she was earlier. Something had shifted, not the pain, not the situation, but her perspective. She wasn't standing in confusion anymore, she was standing in clarity. Painful clarity, but clarity nonetheless, and that made a difference. Her phone buzzed again, this time from someone else, a friend checking in, asking if she was okay, and Rasheeda paused before responding because that question felt complicated. "I'm figuring it out," she typed back, because that was the truth. She wasn't okay, not yet, but she wasn't completely lost either. She was somewhere in between, processing, rebuilding, deciding, and that space, while uncomfortable, was necessary. Back inside, Spice pushed herself off the wall. "Finally. I'm gonna head out," she said, and Kirk looked at her slightly. "Surprised you just leaving?" he asked, and Spice gave him a small look. "This ain't something I can fix for you. This is on you now," she replied, and Kirk nodded slightly because he understood that much. "At least you did what you thought was right," he said, and Spice paused for a moment before answering. "I did what needed to be done. What you do next is what matters now," and with that she walked toward the door, leaving Kirk alone with everything that had unfolded. The silence that followed was different now, not tense, not explosive, just heavy. Like the aftermath of something that had already changed everything. Kirk sat there for a long moment, not moving, not speaking, just thinking, and for the first time there were no distractions, no interruptions, no ways to shift the focus. It was just him and the consequences of his own actions. And outside, Rasheeda kept moving forward, each step taking her further from the version of her life that had just been exposed, and closer to something unknown, something uncertain, but hers to define. And as she walked, one thing stayed clear in her mind. This wasn't just about what she lost, it was about what she was no longer willing to accept, and that realization, more than anything else, was what kept her moving, even when everything else felt like it had come to a complete stop. And just like that, everything you thought you knew about Kirk Frost and Rasheeda Frost has been completely turned upside down, because this wasn't just a simple mistake, this was layers of secrets, hidden conversations, and a whole situation that had been building right in front of everyone without being fully exposed. Until now, fans are shocked, emotions ran high, and the family was left divided as more details continue to surface. And honestly, it raises even bigger questions. Was this ever going to come out? If Spice didn't speak up, how long would this hidden life have continued? And most importantly, is there any coming back from something this deep, or has the damage already gone too far? Now it's your turn to weigh in, because this situation is far from overdue. You think Rasheeda should walk away for good, or give Kirk another chance after everything that's been revealed? And what do you think is still being hidden behind the scenes? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this story is only getting messier from here. And trust you don't want to miss what happens next, so make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you're always the first to catch the next explosive update. Because if this is how things started, just imagine what could come out next.